So in 2 Samuel chapter 8, we have a character, David is expanding his kingdom. It's a record of various military campaigns that he conducted north, south, east, and towards the Philistines. And particularly the mentions of the Philistines in chapter 8 are intriguing, because the Philistines had been a thorn in the side of Israel for generations, going way back into the time of the Judges. And so David's defeat of the Philistines, and even causing them to become tributaries, is a significant milestone. And then as things evolve, David leads military forces against several different neighboring tribes and nations, and he conquers them, or at least defeats them. And then we spent a little bit of time in chapter 9 last week, and it's intriguing that in the middle of 2 chapters, now remember that in the original Hebrew writing, they didn't divide it up into chapters. So this is all one narrative. We, that is later Bible students, added chapters and verses so that we could do something like, say, open the Bible to 2 Samuel chapter 8. But this narrative of David's military campaigns has embedded in the very center of it something that is not a military campaign, and I'm talking about chapter 9. Chapter 9 is a very different sort of thing, and I'm suggesting that it's in the position it's in, and it has something to do with the character of David, but it also has something to do with the picture that the Bible is trying to paint of David's descendant, and I mean Jesus. And the picture that is being painted is one of great kindness and faithfulness and mercy and love, and it's the story of Mephibosheth. So we did talk about it some last week. We're going to review that a little bit. So in 2 Samuel chapter 9, I'm going to read a couple of verses, starting in verse 1. Then David said, "Is there yet anyone left of the house of Saul, that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? Now there was a servant of the house of Saul whose name was Ziba, and they called him to David, and the king said to him, 'Are you Ziba?' And he said, 'I am your servant.' The king said, 'Is there not yet anyone of the house of Saul to whom I may show the kindness of God?' And Ziba said to the king, 'There is still a son of Jonathan who is crippled in both feet.' So the king said to him, 'Where is he?' And Ziba said to the king, 'Behold, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel, in Lodebar.' Then King David sent and brought him from the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel, from Lodebar. Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, came to David and fell on his face and prostrated himself. And David said, 'Mephibosheth.' And he said, 'Here is your servant.' David said to him, 'Do not fear, for I will surely show kindness to you for the sake of your father Jonathan, and will restore to you all the land of your grandfather Saul, and you shall eat at my table regularly.' Again he prostrated himself and said, 'What is your servant, that you should regard a dead dog like me?'" This is an incredibly interesting and moving story on many different levels. There's some Semitic or Middle Eastern traits or characteristics that we can find out that we find a little strange. So in verse 2, Ziba, the servant, probably the chief steward of Saul, is called in, and David says, "Are you Ziba?" And he doesn't say, "Yes, I am, your majesty." He says, "I am your servant." And you might even notice when Mephibosheth comes in verse 6, he says the same thing. You say, "Well, that's a little weird, you know." Well, remember, this is 1000 BC in Israel, in a different culture, and this is how you do it. This is the proper protocol. You don't say to the king, "Yes, my name is Ziba," or "Yes, you figured it out, I'm Mephibosheth." You don't say that. If you're showing proper respect and deference, you say, "I am your servant." And you're doing two things at once. You're acknowledging, yes, you're right when you call me Ziba. And secondly, I'm saying, you're my superior and I'm the servant. So this is proper etiquette in the court. We find that a little weird, but that's how you do it. That's being polite. in that culture. And it is not unusual for a relatively new king to ask a question like David asks, but he adds something else to it. It's not unusual for a king to say, did my predecessor have any children? Did my predecessor, the king before me, is there any of his family that's left still alive? But when the king asks that, usually he's got a different motive for it. What would the motive be? Kill them all, because I don't want to be looking over my shoulder for the rest of my life. They might come out to find me. They might make some sort of a move on me. They might say, no, you're an upstart. I'm the legitimate heir to the throne, and I've got a bunch of people that agree with me, and we're going to kill you. And so normal protocol in that day and era and age was it is okay. It's absolutely normal. I'm not saying it's okay in God's eyes, but it's okay in that sort of a setting to eliminate any potential threat, including children of a predecessor, relatives. You just get rid of the whole family. And now you never have to wonder, I wonder if I missed somebody. And I wonder if in 20 years they're going to come around and say, I want that throne. So it's not unusual to ask the question, is there anybody left from my predecessor's family? But David, in verse 1, notice his motivation. That I may show kindness for Jonathan's sake. And we studied a little bit last week. What does David mean when he says, for Jonathan's sake? What is he getting at? So early on, it was actually right after David had killed Goliath. David came back and said to the king, well, I killed him. Here's his head. Because he chopped off the head of Goliath. And he's talking about God was gracious. He gave us the victory. And remember, Jonathan was there, and he met David. And it says that the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David. And it says Jonathan loved David as he loved his own life. And he actually, right then, he said, you are one interesting guy. Now, it's possible that Jonathan was significantly older than David. We're talking maybe 10 or 12 or even 20 years. They're not both teenagers. David is pretty young, but Jonathan is probably significantly older than that. But Jonathan says to David, you are one high-quality guy. I detect in you a great love for Jehovah, and you and I, we're going to be good friends. Do you remember he sealed that covenant by doing what? He stripped off his armor, and he gave it to David, and then he gave him his weapons. Now, Jonathan and Saul would have had very high-class weapons. They would have been made out of steel as opposed to bronze or inferior iron. So Jonathan is giving David, many times in the ancient world, not always, but many times, weapons were considered an extension of the warrior. They're actually part of his personality. And so Jonathan is sealing this covenant agreement, this promise. You and I are going to be best friends for life. And it's not as if Jonathan just did that and then walked away. No. Jonathan was there through thick and thin over the next couple of years to support and encourage David while David was being hounded and harassed by a madman. Who was the madman again? Saul, Jonathan's dad. So Jonathan is standing up to his own father, the king, and representing David well. So on more than one occasion, I think there's maybe 2 more times where Jonathan met with David to encourage him, and he made him swear an oath again. So this covenant bond, this friendship, is a deep-seated thing. And on at least one occasion, Jonathan says to David, now I want you to tell me again, when you are king, you tell me that you're not going to wipe out my family. you're going to look after my family. And David said, yeah, you got it. I promise. So that is what David is talking about here. He's getting settled in his kingdom. He's getting established. He's building up his power base. And in the middle of two chapters, chapter 8 and chapter 10, that deal with military campaigns, chapter 9 is really about his character. It's really about who David is as a person. And we suggested that this thing where David says, go find Mephibosheth and bring him to me, it's not really a strategic move. He's not really currying favor with any political group. He's not really saying, I found somebody who has a brilliant military mind. This guy is a tactician. He's a strategist beyond compare. Or this guy is going to be the chief of my bodyguard because he is 7'1" and he weighs 300 pounds and he's a warrior. What do we know about Mephibosheth from here and earlier? He's crippled. He's lame in both feet. He can't even walk. What kind of an asset is Mephibosheth to David? Zero. He doesn't bring anything. There's no asset that he is bringing to David. David not only says to Mephibosheth, I am restoring to you all the land, all the property that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and all the servants to run the estate. It's probably several hundred acres, maybe more. It's probably got animals. It might have vineyards. It might have olive groves. It might have fruit orchards. It might have a whole bunch of stuff with it. And David says, all of that would be mine because he's the new king. David has the right to take that over. He's saying, I'm giving it to you. But he goes a step further when he says in the end of verse 7, you shall eat at my table regularly. What does that mean? You're going to be part of the family. You're going to, when we have a meal together, and in the ancient world, eating food together, breaking bread together, was a sign of peace, of fellowship, of joy, of companionship. When we have a meal together, you're going to be sitting here, right here, with my own family. You're going to be like one of my sons. It probably implies that Mephibosheth had an apartment in the palace. It would suggest that Mephibosheth not only had his own land with a nice house, staff to run things for him, but in addition, whenever he wanted to, Mephibosheth could live in Jerusalem in the king's own palace because he had his own suite. And maybe staff would come with him from his estate, stay with him and see to his needs while he's living in David's palace. And David says to him, I'm giving you all of this. What did Mephibosheth do to earn it? Zero. There was nothing. And I suggested that what is happening, some of what is happening, is we've seen it in other places. David is, in some regards, a picture of Jesus Christ. Sometimes he's a really good picture. Other times, we have to keep reading, and we're going to get into chapter 11. And chapter 11 and 12 is not so much. But there are places in David's life where he is an excellent representation of Jesus Christ. So we glanced at it last week, but we're going to look again. Keep your finger here. We're coming back. But go to Ephesians chapter 2. Ephesians, the second chapter, and see what I mean by David in his character and his actions is representing Jesus Christ very, very well. Ephesians 2, and looking at verse 1. And you were dead in your trespasses and sins, in which you formerly walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, of the spirit that is now working in the sons of disobedience. Among them we too all formerly lived, in the lusts of our flesh, indulging the desires of the flesh and of the mind, and were by nature children of wrath, even as the rest. But God, being rich in mercy, because of his great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our transgressions, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you've been saved, and seated us up, and raised us up with him, and seated us with him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus. The picture you get in verse 6 is, we have a name tag and a place setting at the table of God in heaven. We belong there. That's our home. We have been seated at that table. How? Why? Well, it's because I'm so rich and important. No. It's because I bring such strategic asset to God and his... No. We were dead. We were sinners. We bring nothing. But God, because of his mercy, God who is rich in grace, God who is the source of love, he said, I'm bringing you over here. You belong to me now. We're getting rid of all that old garbage. You're part of my family. And you're going to eat regularly at my table. So all the blessings, all the glory, all the benefits of being a part of the family of God given to us who do not deserve it. We did nothing to earn it. We couldn't earn it. Impossible. So back in 2 Samuel chapter 9, David is a very good representation of the grace and mercy and kindness of God in Jesus Christ. And so Mephibosheth is now part of the palace. He's part of David's court. And it's entirely because of David's kindness and his faithfulness to the oath that he swore to Jonathan. So now chapter 10, here is more military campaign information. The king of the Ammonites, so this would be really kind of due east of Jerusalem, across the Jordan River, in what is now the country of Jordan. And in fact, the city that's going to be talked about in the next chapter, it's called Rabbah in Samuel, is today known as Ammon. It's the capital of Jordan, Ammon, Jordan. That's the city that was being attacked and under siege by Joab. So what has happened is, in verse 1, the king of the Ammonites died, and Hanun, his son, became king in his place. And apparently there had been some kind of friendliness between the former king and David. And so David sends ambassadors from him to the new king saying, I'm really sorry to hear about your dad. They're going to go attend his funeral and extend condolences on behalf of David and his court. And so in verse 2, that's what David does. Then David said, I will show kindness to Hanun, the son of Nahash, just as his father showed kindness to me. So David sent some of his servants to console him concerning his father. But when David's servants came to the land of the Ammonites, the princes of the Ammonites said to Hanun, their lord, do you think that David is honoring your father because he has sent consolers to you, consolers rather to you? Has David not sent his servants to you in order to search the city, to spy it out and overthrow it? Interesting. We were just studying Rehoboam Wednesday night. And one of the problems that Rehoboam had is he listened to the wrong advice. And young upstarts gave him bad advice, and he followed it rather than listening to the advice of the older guys who'd been around the block. And here, the counselors of Hanun say, these guys that are from David over there in Jerusalem, you think they're here to say, we're really sorry to hear about your dad, and we're condolences to you from David. They're not here for that. What do they say about these emissaries from David? They're spies. They're here to check things out. They're here to look at the walls, to look at the gates, to look at the blockhouses, to look at the fortifications, to see how your patrols run, to look at your soldiers, your bodyguard, your staff. They're here checking you out. They're not here because they're friendly. And so, verse 4, Hanun took David's servants and shaved off half their beards, cut off their garments in the middle as far as their hips, and sent them away. So they shaved half their beard. Now, in the ancient East, a man's beard is a token of his masculinity. It's a token of his strength and power, his identity. And so you're almost really emasculating them. You're really dishonoring them. This is disgusting. This is, you couldn't be more aggressive and more forward if you just slapped them in the face. That's what this is. There's other tokens of dishonor and of showing, that this is disgusting or whatever. One would be throwing your shoe at somebody. To throw your shoe at somebody is showing, I can't stand you. You're the dregs of the earth. So cutting off, as far as I know, this is the only record of something like this in the whole Bible. But it is so embarrassing to David's guys, they don't feel like they can come back to Jerusalem. They get as far as Jericho, verse 5. David hears about this and he says, you guys, you don't have to come back into the city. Stay where you are. Let's hope that their beards grew fast. Because he said, just stay there until your beards grow back in and you look okay. And then you can come on home. Verse 6, now when the sons of Ammon saw that they had become odious, what's odious mean? Really, really wretched, really, really bad. I thought you were my friend. Now, when I look at you, I get sick to my stomach. That's what this is. They had become odious to David. The sons of Ammon sent and hired Arameans of Beth Rehob and the Arameans of Zobah, 20,000 foot soldiers, and the king of Maacah with 1,000 men, and the men of Tob with 12,000 men. So the Ammonites, Hanun, the new king, figures out, we might have had a little diplomatic faux pas. Might have been a little problem. And whether or not David was, angry at them before, he wasn't actually. Now he for sure is. And so Hanun and his counselors hire an army, 20,000 plus another 13,000, various sources on the eastern side of the Jordan and from the north. The Arameans are from the north. Verse 7, so this is escalating. It started out David sending people with a sympathy card to Hanun because Hanun's dad had died. That gets rejected in a bad way.
Were they really spies?
No, there's nothing to indicate. David's motivation is in verse 2. I will show kindness to Hanun because Hanun's dad, Nahash, showed kindness, and we don't know what that is. There's no record of what that was. But David's motivation is one of kindness.
I just wondered if anybody else in the area had beards, or was that entirely
No, it was common. And the Lord's asking, do other peoples besides the Jews have beards? And you can look at statues and pictures and so on from that time period, 1000 BC. Most Semitic peoples in the Middle East had beards, men, not women. about half the population. Yeah, let's clear that up right now. So Hanun is now hiring armies because it has escalated, and now the hiring of the armies, do you see this in verse 7? When David heard of it, heard of what? Hanun just hired armies. Well, we don't know that David was going to do anything before, but David says, what is this? Well, this is an arms race. We just found out, this would be extremely similar to things that we read in the news right now about the Chinese and the military buildup along the Straits of Taiwan, or the Russians along the border with Ukraine. We read about that, we say, why do they have 100,000 men and a whole bunch of divisions of tanks right there at the border of the Ukraine? We say, what would that mean? And David says, look at that. There's a whole bunch of armies over there just across the Jordan River. So verse 8, the sons of Ammon came out and drew up in battle array at the entrance of the city. The city is going to be Rabbah. And while the Arameans of Zobah and of Rehob and the men of Tob and Maacah were by themselves in the field. So they have coordinated their defense strategy, and the Ammonites are going to be defending their capital, their main city, in front of the city and around the city. The other components of the mercenary army are kind of hidden. They're out in the field. They're a little ways away from the city. Verse 9, now when Joab, who's Joab again? David's nephew, and he's the commander-in-chief of the army. So he's the guy he's the leading general of the Israeli troops. Now when Joab saw that the battle was set against him in front and in the rear, so this is a two-front battle, and it's one of the worst things that can happen. So you understand tactically, if you're the blue team and you're going to fight, what you really would like to do is find that you have the enemy all in one spot. And you can fight, you can move around, all of this. What happens if you discover that the enemy has forces in a different location? Uh-oh. So this is called a two-front war, two-front battle. You have to divide your forces. And you do not have all your men, all your materiel, all your equipment, all your animals, all your supplies in one spot. You have to send some over there. You guys look out over there. And then you got to go over there. And so here's what Joab is facing. Verse 9, when Joab saw that the battle was set against him in front and in the rear, he selected from all the choice men of Israel and arrayed them against the Arameans. So he picked the best troops that he himself is going to command going against the city, and the city is Rabbah. But verse 10, the remainder of the people he placed in the hand of Abishai his brother, and he arrayed them against the sons of Ammon. He's dividing his forces. And he's saying, okay, you have to hold back these people. You have to fight them. I'm going to try to attack the city. I'm going against the Ammonites. You are going to go against the Arameans. And then in verse 11, if the Arameans are too strong for me, then you shall help me. But if the sons of Ammon are too strong for you, then I will come to help you. So they're lining this up so that it's a mutual defense compact. We're going to help each other out. This would imply or suggest that they had a means of communication. Now, they didn't have radios. They didn't have wire telephones. They didn't have internet. What would the communication be? Runners. So what would a typical runner, what would his qualifications be? Fast, and another one. You got to keep the information squared away in your head. You can't get over there and tell them, well, there's somebody coming from the northwest. No, I mean the northeast. Wait, it could be the south. No, you can't do that. You've got to be able to tell him exactly the information crisply, clearly, so that the commander of that other division can respond to the news. So fast, probably, agile, and able to convey communication very, very clearly. That was their communication. It implies or suggests that Joab and Abishai, the two brothers, would stay in touch with each other during the battle. And so, verse 12, be strong and let us show ourselves courageous for the sake of our people and for the cities of our God, and may the Lord do what is good in his sight. Interesting. Does Joab have a relationship to God? Seems like it. He does use, there's a clue in verse 12. Do you see what it is? So in English, it comes across as this. Do you remember what it is when we have Lord all in caps? So that would be, in Hebrew, Yahweh. In English, oftentimes, Jehovah. That's God's name. That's his personal name. And Joab knew God by his name. I think that he probably was what we would call a believer. Now, later on, we find some things out about Joab that, he's not always a real honorable character. He's complicated. But it does seem as though he does have a relationship to Jehovah.
Pastor, I'm just a little lost. So David intended to time this, and then they mistrust basically did what they did, but who made military action first? Is David trying to defend, or?
Yeah.
And because the Ammonites basically attacked because they thought
Sure.
he was going to attack them.
So in verses 5 and 6, you see the development of it. So the messengers come back from the Ammonites, and they have to stay in Jericho. And in verse 6, the Ammonites detect, we think that David doesn't like us anymore. Because they figure out shaving half their beards, cutting off half their clothes, sending them back with a rebuff. They may not have liked that. And so the Ammonites begin the process of a military buildup. Now, it doesn't say that they were planning on attacking, but David sees that military buildup, and he has to respond by protecting his people, by he himself building up, getting ready for war. And so in verse 7, he mobilizes the army, and he says, we got to, and he does send them out. It says he sent Joab and all the army, the mighty men. Now, the Ammonites, whether or not they were going to do anything, now they have to. So this is a mutually reinforcing ladder. And where did it all start? Well, it started with Hanun, the king of Ammon, treating the messengers poorly. Would it necessarily have gone to war? Well, maybe not. If Hanun had just said, nah, I don't think these messengers are here to spy. I think they're just here to say, we're sorry about your dad.
Right, but why was there that? So he didn't have the same relationship because David was honoring his own father, but he didn't trust David.
Correct. And he listened to the counselors who told him, if you think these messengers from Israel are here just to show sorrow at your loss, no, that's not what it is. They're here to spy. And had they not said that, we don't know what Hanun would have done. But perhaps he would have just shook their hands and said, yeah, tell David I appreciate that. He and my dad were good friends, and I appreciate that he sent guys over. Tell him I said thanks. And maybe that was it. But because he listened, just like Rehoboam listened to the young men who said, you got to show how tough you are to the people of Israel, it was bad advice. So it escalated, it got out of hand. And the upshot of this is going to be the Ammonites are going to be trounced. And, we might even say, see that God's hand is at work even in these details to allow for David to have yet another military victory. There's something else going on, and that is chapter 10 is a setup for chapter 11. There is a bit of a clue that is a foreshadowing in chapter 10, verse 7. Can you see what it is? Think about it for a moment. Chapter 10, verse 7. What is the clue? David sent Joab, who's the commander, but typically the king leads his troops into battle. He's done it before. David himself has led troops into battle, and we're getting a little clue. So David's not actually on the front lines. He's back at his palace. And that sets us up for chapter 11, where the troops are away, they're fighting the war, everything's going according to plan, and David is back home having scrambled eggs and bacon, and no bacon. Jews can't have bacon, no bacon. Scrambled eggs and beef. And walking around on the roof of his palace at dusk. You remember how that goes, right? And he sees across a little way. Okay. So chapter 10, verse 7 is a little clue that it's not sin. but David is setting himself up for something, and that's important. So I thought we were going to get farther. Let's see if we can finish out chapter 10 and get set up for next week. So Joab's plan for mutually reinforcing lines of defense is a good one. He and his brother Abishai fight against the various component parts of this army, the Arameans and the Ammonites. And verse 13, Joab and the people who were with him drew near to the battle against the Arameans, and they fled before him. When the sons of Ammon saw that the Arameans fled, they also fled before Abishai and entered the city. Then Joab returned from fighting against the sons of Ammon and came to Jerusalem. When the Arameans saw that they had been defeated by Israel, they gathered themselves together. So the Arameans are a very large, kind of diffuse group of people. They're semi-nomadic. They're up in the north. They roam across what today would be southern Syria, Damascus. They cover a wide geographic area. And there are also various tribes of them, it would appear. But when they find out that they are being defeated, they send out a plea for help. More of them, more armed bands come together. They gather themselves together. Verse 16, and Hadadezer sent and brought out the Arameans who were beyond the river. The river, and the word that's used here in the Hebrew is a very particular word. It's not used of any other entity besides the Euphrates. This is the Euphrates River. So the tribes of Arameans beyond, this is hundreds of miles away. Word goes out, we need everybody who is armed and trained to come down here and fight against Israel. There's problems. We're getting beat up. And so they bring all of these troops together. They came to Hilam, and Shobach, the commander of the army of Hadadezer, led them. Now when it was told David, he gathered all Israel together and crossed the Jordan and came to Hilam, and the Arameans arrayed themselves to meet David and fought against him. So here's a much larger army than before, but the Arameans fled before Israel. Question: why did they flee before Israel? We're not even into the strategy or the tactics of it yet, but we know from previous chapters, why is it that David can win? God is blessing. The Lord is with them. God is helping a smallish nation with a smallish army and maybe not the most technologically advanced weaponry. God is helping that army to have victory. So the Arameans fled, verse 18. David killed 700 charioteers of the Arameans and 40,000 horsemen and struck down Shobach, the commander of the army, and he died there. When all the kings, servants of Hadadezer, saw that they were defeated by Israel, they made peace with Israel and served them. Now think about that for a moment. This is not just right in Jerusalem and for 20 miles around. They brought in troops from across the Euphrates River. That's a long ways away. So this, again, is evidence of the blessing of God, the protection of God. David and Israel are becoming a regional power. They're becoming a force to be reckoned with for quite a ways around. So people in the Middle East are sitting up and taking notice. Whoa, did you hear what happened in the Aramean army? 40,000, 700 chariots. Whoa. This guy David, anybody know, where did he go to school? You know, what did he train, who did he train with? And of course the pagan nations would have no clue that it's actually Jehovah. It's God who's giving the victory. And the impact of this is, so the Arameans feared to help the sons of Ammon anymore. So another way of putting it would be, David broke the back of the coalition of the Arameans and the Ammonites. The Arameans said, you guys over there in Ammon, Rabbah, you're on your own. The last time we tried to help you out, we got beat up real bad. Forget it. If you want an ally, go look somewhere else. We're not your friends anymore. And so David is breaking the power of even largish groups of armies and so on all around him. And it's because of God's blessing. So chapter 11 is going to introduce us to David and Bathsheba. We'll get into that next week, Lord willing. Do you have any questions or comments as we shut down this morning? Let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank you that you give victory, that we can see your hand at work in David's life. And Father, we acknowledge that your grace and kindness has brought us, like Mephibosheth, from nothing to being seated at your table. Thank you for your grace and mercy. Now, Father, bless the morning service, that Jesus would be exalted and that we would be edified. In Jesus' name, amen.